Thanks for having me here, and thank you for taking the time to learn about electrical injury. It's been called an iceberg injury or an invisible injury, and I first found out that the cause of my health issues were this injury through a friend for many years, Terry Becker. He's a senior member and a past vice chair of the CSA Z462 Workplace Electrical Safety Technical Committee, and currently a voting member and working group leader of that. Myself, I'm a master electrician. I am one of the youngest professional electrical contractors in Alberta, and I am also one of the youngest retired professional electrical contractors in Alberta. And it's because the long-term sequelae of electrical injury has reduced my health so where I cannot work in the trade anymore. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because low voltage is not low risk, and no voltage is safe voltage. So I never saw this when I went to trade school. I never saw this in the trade at all. Danger, low voltage. We were taught to work on live panels because everybody else was working. And if we turned off the power, nobody else could work. We weren't taught the importance of rubber insulating gloves with leather protectors. We weren't taught much of anything. The focus was ladder safety. But did you know that exposure to electrical current is known to cause over 40+ delayed symptoms, which can present 1 to 5+ years after the injury? And that's what we're here to learn about today. So I'm going to start with the definition of low voltage. And the Canadian Electrical Code 2021 definition is extra low voltage is any voltage not exceeding 30 volts, where low voltage is any voltage exceeding 30 volts, but not exceeding 1,000 volts. High voltage is anything above 1,000 volts. And this is also defined in one of the medical reviews that we are going to go over, long-term sequelae of electrical injury. Now, I'm going to quickly touch on what sequela and sequelae are. Sequela is a morbid condition following or occurring as a consequence of another condition or event. And sequelae is the plural, more than one. Now, we've always grown up saying, hey, that guy got electrocuted. This man has experienced an electrocution. Well, this is an error in how you've been taught the definition of electrocution versus electric shock. Electrocution is actually when you die. Electric shock is when you survive. And there's a very definitive difference between the two. Now, how have we really not learned about this injury so far? Well, an interesting fact is we really didn't get mains electricals running to cities until around 1878 in Chicago, or it wasn't until May 2nd in 1911 that Adam Beck, the chairman of the Hydroelectrical Power Commission of Ontario, pushed the ceremonial button in Canada, in Toronto, marking the inauguration of a public-owned electricity distribution system. And there's two cities I want to focus on today, and those are Toronto and Chicago. And those fall in North America's top 5 most populated cities, according to Wikipedia. Now, the history of the research in these two cities only began around 1996. That's because if you look back to how long electricity has been mainstream, my grandma's generation, maybe her mother's generation, that's the generation that experienced mainstream electrical. That's when we started having this risk. And because that's only a few generations and it's a delayed injury, it wasn't until around 1996 that this research started to really identify the pattern, the complex pattern of the sequelae of electrical injury. Did you know there's only 2 hospitals in North America that perform research and rehabilitation on electrical injury? One is the Sunnybrook Hospital out of Toronto, Ontario, and the other is the Chicago Electrical Trauma Research Center out of Illinois. Now, medical teams, up until recently, were led by at the Sunnybrook by Dr. Mark Yeske. He's now moved to the Vice President of Research at the Hamilton Health and Science Center. But Dr. Mark Yeske has been caring for burn patients and conducting research in the field of burns for nearly 25 years. He is a global leader in burn care, research, and education. And according to ExpertSkate, he is the second highest ranked expert in burns in the world. Now, he was the head of research for Sunnybrook up until this year. The other hospital that is performing research into electrical injury is headed by a Dr. Lee. Now, Dr. Lee is not only a Harvard graduated surgeon, he is also an MIT graduated bioelectrical engineer. He is a past president of the Midwest Association of Plastic Surgeons. He's regularly selected as one of America's top plastic surgeons by Chicago Magazine and national publications. And he has a ton of awards and fellowships that he's, because of his expertise and his level of education in this subject matter. Now, we're going to touch on some medical reviews, electrical injury part 1 and electrical injury part 2, as well as long-term sequelae of electrical injury. I'm going to read through these really quick because it's really important to hear the exact phrasing of these medical reviews. They're not hard to understand, and let's get into them. So conclusion of electrical injury part 1 mechanism is electroporation has only recently been identified as a primary cause of neurological injury following electrical exposure and is incompletely understood. Other mechanisms of injury may also present, such as breakdown of cytoskeleton due to excessive intercellular calcium, or from systematic alterations of the HPA. Of particular interest is how seemingly remote electrical exposures affect the brain. Furthermore, the impact of electrical injuries on the developing nervous system of a child is unknown. Additional longitudinal studies are sorely needed to determine the progression of electrical injuries over time. 4 mechanisms of cellular injury by electricity are presently known. They are the direct effects of the current, thermal burns, mechanical injury due to falls, and electroporation. The passage of the current through the tissue can cause intense muscle contractions. Current pathways, including the chest, can be life-threatening as the result of induced astyle or apnea. Electricity may also be converted into heat, resulting in varying degrees of burns, particularly associated with high-voltage electrical injury. Loss of consciousness is possible, which may lead to fall and mechanical blunt force trauma to the head. Finally, electricity can directly cause pore formation to the lipid bilayers that form cell membranes, a process called electroporation. And this is important. This is what is theorized as the cause of the delayed symptomatology of this injury. Talk about electroporation. What is it? Electroporation is a process that we commonly use in gene therapy. And I will give you the brief Cole's notes of it, is essentially if you want to get some type of treatment, some type of solution into the cells, maybe it's a cancer cell and you want to get something in there that can kill it, you send a small electrical current around the proximity of the cells after you inject the fluid. The cells will open pores, that fluid can get in, and then that is how that works. But when we're in the field as electricians, the millivolts and milliamps that is used in a medical facility, we are dealing with 120 volts, which is 60,000 times the voltage that your body is transmitting through your nervous system. So what happens? Well, according to electrical injury part 1 mechanisms, electroporation is the process by which an electrical field induces formation of pores through the cell membrane, allowing free passage of ions and fluid. The cell will attempt to maintain its ionic gradients through great expenditures of energy. If the pores do not reseal, the cell will eventually exhaust its energy reserves and die. If the pores seal, the cell may eventually recover. However, the sealing process is considerably slower than the pore opening. Even if the pores close, secondary injury processes may be disruptive or even fatal to the cell. The influx of sodium ions in a permeabilized cell prevents the transmission of signals. And this was an image from the ECA AGM 2002 keynote presentation where Dr. Mark Yeske talked about electroporation and channelopathy, which is the after effect. We're essentially burning holes through our cells. You know, there's a little bit more to it, as I read in electroporation, but we are causing harm by minor low voltage shocks. and it's just a delayed cluster of symptoms. I've been through them, and they are not fun. A pair of gloves and rubber, insulated gloves with rubber protectors, a lot easier than what you're going to start to hear the consequences are. And I'm going to lead into electrical injury part 2 consequences now. Conclusion. Ultimately, electrical injury reflects a trauma that includes both neurological and psychological aspects. Each has significant overlap and interaction with the other, resulting in a complex syndrome of inattention, memory lapses, depression, anxiety, muscle weakness, fatigue, extremity numbness or tingling, pain, and sleep disturbances that greatly resembles mild traumatic brain injury. It's funny, concussions are correlated to electrical injury, except unlike physical concussions, there is no neuroimaging that can scan and diagnose this. So historically, the severity of electrical injury was often not recognized and treatment was not sought, especially when the acute symptoms were mild. And given the evidence for late onset deficits, clinicians should consider screening for electrical injury in all initial patient intakes. Future research will need to expand the understanding of mechanisms and consequences of electrical injury. Scary. Rubber insulated gloves with leather protectors. Lotto, loco, tago, that's all you need to do to prevent this. Because while a person severely burned from a high voltage electrical injury will likely seek emergency care, many victims of lesser shocks may not. Thus, the researchers can only estimate the true extent of the problem, and the patients and the medical personnel may be unaware of the possible long-term sequelae of even low voltage injuries. There is no question that electrical injury can cause physical injury to the nervous system. Although the thermal injuries were once presumed to be the primary cause of any cellular damage, electroporation is now thought to be the more common mechanism of this injury. While electrical injuries clearly can cause measurable acute neurological injury and even death, the long-term sequelae for survivors are more controversial. Incorrect assumptions associated with electrical injury have interfered with both research and treatment. These include the use of visible burns as a basis for judging injury severity, belief that high voltage exposures are more dangerous than low voltage, belief that psychological factors are the primary cause of poor outcomes, and overemphasis on the importance of secondary gain. And I'm going to pause here to talk a little bit about what I had experienced. I started in this trade, as I said, 18. I was a hard worker, and I did what my boss told me to. And I got shocks, and I didn't realize what was happening. I started forgetting things, and I saw yoga early on, and I was able to work through those injuries. And I kind of rode this cycle of the sequelae of electrical injury over the years. But in 2015, I was working on a Michael's store, and I made a mistake, and I got held. I was digging my hand up in a box, and I was leaning up against a light fixture, and it went in the right index finger, and it went out the web of my left hand, and I was held. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move a muscle. And I just thought I was going to die. And heaven forbid, I fell off my ladder and onto my apprentice. And I got up, and just like every other shock, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go. This one was a little different, and drove myself to the hospital. I got released the next day, or right away, actually. It wasn't the next day. I got released within hours. They did a few tests on me. They said, maybe go to the burn ward at the U of A, and no follow-up. And that was my experience. Went to the U of A, and they said, there's nothing we can do with you. So I went home, and that kind of wave that I was riding over my younger years of being an electrician, it got worse. And I was in Las Vegas in 2017 visiting a conference, and I lost the use of my legs. It was so painful to walk. It was like the worst muscle cramping I've ever experienced. Like my legs were being crushed and they were lit on fire, and I could not do anything but myofascial release for the life of me. And that pain lasted over 6 months, and it happened again. And then the third time that it happened, it wasn't just my legs, it was my entire body. I felt like my brain was on fire. I was screaming, and that was the start of a very different life for me. because let's just get back into electrical injury part 2 consequences. While the affective disturbances are present following electrical injury, most research suggests these deficits generally have a later onset rather than preset. Neuropsychological impairments. Thus, electrical injury can lead to a neuropsychological syndrome with acute, prolonged, and delayed symptoms that can greatly interfere with the person's functioning. Now, it's one thing to be in a car accident. It's one thing to get hit by a semi-truck. Now, it's another thing to get held and then walk away, and 2 years later start getting hit by semi-trucks again without anyone know what's happening. And that's why I am advocating as hard as I am and raising as much awareness, because somebody should have done this sooner. And this was actually is a very good medical review, and it was published by my Workers' Compensation Board of Alberta, and that's why I've kept the logos on this. It was published by a Marnie L. Wesner and a John Hickey. Both doctors are medical consultants for workers' compensation. It discloses, and there's 25 research papers cited in this article, and we never heard about this in Alberta until I started talking about this. So let's hear what they knew, what they could have done to raise awareness before other workers like me got affected. And this paper, very well written, says conclusion. The appearance of these consequences of electrical injury might be substantially delayed, with onset 1 to 5 or more years after the electrical injury. This poses a problem for the patients and healthcare workers, making it hard to ascribe symptoms to a remote injury when they might not arise until well after the incident event. They state, just like the definition of electrocution and shock, that there are 2 possible consequences of electrical injury. The person either survives or they die. They note that several authors have noted similarities between the non-focal neuropsychological sequelae of electrical injury and head trauma. Electrical injury victims often endorse a variety of symptoms similar to those resulting from traumatic brain injury. However, the long-term sequelae of electrical injury might be more subtle, pervasive, and less well-defined, and are particularly difficult to diagnose, as the link between the injury and the symptoms can often go unrecognized by patients and their physicians. For family physicians who include compensation or legal medicine in their scope of practice, to present an informed, accurate methodological opinion determining causation and attributing outcome to an ill-defined problem that might not result in objective clinical findings becomes a difficult challenge. That means there's no scans. They've sent me for the scans. Dr. Yeski has many videos where he talks about they will have to send you for the scans. And it's the lack of evidence that is the evidence. The fact that there is nothing else that defines why we have the same symptomatology and sequelae. Many who suffer electrical injury have considerably difficulty returning to work. The appearance of non-resolving, non-path-related symptoms following electrical injury is a scientific puzzle. Now let's talk about the returning to work. I can never go and do the physical activity that I used to as an electrician. I look like I'm in shape, and I'm doing yoga, which is amazing for this injury, hot yoga, massages, hot tubs. But there's a level of fatigue. There's a level of, you get your blood pressure up in your head. You just can't think anymore. There is so much that just is not worth not wearing gloves, rubber insulated gloves, leather protectors. I'm going to hit on this once more. Lockout, tagout. That's all we need to do to prevent this injury. You know, low voltage is not low risk, because progressive cellular damage and a death count for the evolution of the delayed onset symptoms of electrical injury. The appearance of these consequences of electrical injury might be subtly delayed with onset of 1 to 5 more years after the electrical worker's injuries. And again, they state this poses a problem for the patients and the healthcare workers, making it hard to ascribe symptoms to a remote injury when they might not arise until well after the incident event. I was going doctor to doctor. They all told me I was healthy as a horse. You're fit. All of this, there's nothing to worry about. I couldn't sleep. I was having migraines, headaches, and just pain all over. Tennis balls in the back of my shoulders. My hips felt like they were broken. My ribs felt like they were broken. And unless I do my daily management and take all my medications, that's life when you don't wear gloves. Because the severity of electrical injury is, however, not proportional to the source voltage, visible burns, loss of consciousness, cardiac arrest, or neuroimaging findings. Doesn't matter the voltage, it doesn't matter the visible burns, and there will be no scans that can show and prove you have this. So good luck getting help. Electrical injury is unique in that it typically results in low mortality rates, but very high rates of short and long-term morbidity. And you don't want to know what it feels like to have parts of your nervous system die off because you wouldn't wear the gloves. And again, they drive this home. It seems counterintuitive, but low voltage electrical injuries are more often fatal than high voltage injuries are. With sources greater than 300 volts, current might be transmitted by arcing, caused by formation of conductive plasma between the source and the ground. We know that as arc flash. It really took the scene and takes away from shock. Shock is the more likely hazard because arc blasts don't happen often. The blasts, though, affect high voltage arcing, can throw the victim away, and they talk about it limiting the contact time. But they acknowledge that in such situations, the degree of injury are actually small because when you're dealing with the lower voltage, the 60 hertz AC can stimulate the muscle contraction, and that's where I was held. That's where you can't breathe, you can't let go, and you pray to God, you just die sooner than later. Wear gloves, because in general, high voltage injury results in a greater degree of acute injury, but the potential for a spectrum of late sequelae of electrical injury is not affected by the magnitude of electrical force. So if you're a residential electrician, don't think that you are immune from this injury. It just might take a little bit longer for the arthritis and the muscle pain and the memory loss and the other 30 plus 40 symptoms to develop. And here they are. That warning, danger, low voltage, was from table 1 of the long-term sequelae of electrical injury, a medical review written by 2 WCB medical consultants. It is cited by the NFPA. It is quoted by the Ontario Electrical Safety Authority every year. These are the delayed sequelae of electrical injury: psychological, neurological, and physical. Wear the gloves. Because danger, low voltage, is known to cause the following. And there's a great video online. I won't play it here. You can search electrical injury, Mark Yeski. You can search ECA electrical injury, Google, YouTube. But this is a video of a doctor ranked number 2 in the world in burn research publication stating the facts that, you know, it's hard to get help because nobody believes this injury exists. They send you for the scans and the scans show up as nothing. But they see patients all the time because they operate out of the largest cities in North America. And they have the masses for the research. So what's the solution? Well, we're starting to do this in Canada. We have electrical safety programs that are now mandatory. The CSA Z462 sets a standard. Education or technical training is coming. There's awareness in construction, and healthcare is still needed. Actually, I wanted to touch upon, it was October 6th this year, the inaugural Electrical Injury Day of Recognition, which was recognized by NETCO and the Canadian Electrical Contractors Association, as well as the IBEW across Canada. Everybody took a moment that day and their toolbox talks were regarding this injury. And I would love to see the United States start raising the same level of awareness, just like the Day of Recognition every year that happens for mourning, you know, injured workers. And we need added advocacy for our workers, for our electricians that build and maintain our infrastructure, because these men, they get hit by trucks and 50% of them experience mental health issues, PST, depression, anxiety, and they need to know that there is help. They need to understand this injury and just understand that, you know, there's things you can do to make this injury better. And it might not have a cure right now, but you can, you know, do hot yoga. For me, I take some medicine and I use hot tubs, and you got to know your triggers. And then the last thing that we need is funding for research and rehabilitation, because there's more men out there that suffer from electrical injury than I would like to even imagine right now. You know, we've 4 generations of thinking that it was safe to lick batteries. safe to touch 120. You know, you got a shock and you just got a beer at the end of the day. So the solution is awareness. Once you're aware that pair of rubber insulated gloves with leather protectors and the second pair, and you take those in every 6 months to get their testing done, have 2 different colors, swap them out. So the first half of the year, you might be using one color. While it's getting tested, you know you have the other color to be using, and you can keep an eye on your crew and make sure they're all wearing the right color. You know, it's a cheaper investment than a couple massages, and definitely a cheaper investment than a hot tub or the chiropractor or the pills and, you know, not being able to pick up your children. There's a lot of things that are cheaper than rubber insulated gloves and leather protectors. Thank you for your time. And yeah, if you have any questions, please email IEEE, and I'll be sure to try and answer as much as I can. Thank you.